Welcome, tale tellers. Your next story is just around the corner and it's a no-sleep story. I think you're going to like it. Today's tale shows that not everything is as it seems. The innocence of youth and the longing of what was once lost. Seriously, today's tale teller is a great writer. Time for some shoutouts though, from all you supporters. I'll try and get through as many fans as I can, and correct me, tale tellers, if I mess up your name. I don't like it when people mess my name up, so I'd expect the same. Okay, the most recent likers and followers are the strong duo that is Blackpaw, 360, and Troy Shaw. I absolutely love the support, especially the amount of likes you're sending my way. I really do appreciate it. It's helping out a lot, actually. And also pointing out problems with the recordings. It is actually helping. So even though you might seem like it's annoying me, it's not. It's helping me immensely to find out what recordings have what issues. So I do really appreciate it. And I think every channel needs fans like you. We also have Light Skin Boy, Bitter Lake. Check out their channel. They do dark ambience metal. It's super intense. Derek Marlowe, Drew Goldstein, Melissa Nix, Cordell Anderson, Aiden Cruz, Casey Shale, who I believe is a tale teller on this show. I'm sure I've read out a story from you before. I swear I have. And Jennifer. No last name, just Jennifer. Okay, tale tellers, you know what time it is. Time to turn off the lights, turn the sound up, and get ready for something different. The title of today's story is My Weeping Watchman, and the tale teller is Spillingskies. The first time I saw him was the Tuesday night, right before my 7th birthday. It was around 11 PM, and I was too excited to fall asleep. I was thinking about presents and cake and friends. I remember, I was drifting between asleep and awake when I felt my mattress creak and depress by my legs, as if someone had sat on it. I opened my eyes and found that someone had. He was tall, even as he sat a little hunched. His hands were covered in blood, and he was staring at them with eyes buried in dark circles. And he was crying, silently, but still violently. I sat up in my bed, and he didn't seem to notice. I stared at him, crying for a long time. I don't know why I didn't scream and yell for my parents. There was a stranger in my room, on my bed, after all. I was a stupidly brave and curious child, and watching him, I felt no fear. Eventually, I got tired of his tears. I reached forward and tugged on his sleeve. "Are you okay, mister?" He looked at me then, and I saw his eyes were brownish, greyish, and tired. He didn't say anything. "Don't cry. I'm sorry you feel bad. Do you want a hug?" I asked, because that was what my mum always asked me after I had been sobbing. He kept looking at me without a word, and I took that as a yes. I wrapped my small arms as far as they would go around his arms and chest, and rested my head against his upper arm. He smelled vaguely of laundry detergent and cold nights. I held him for as long as I could before my arms got tired, humming a lullaby like my mum would do to me. He was crying again, and I felt a tear fall onto my arm. It was warm and wet and trickled down off my arm, falling onto his shirt. Sleep came for me soon enough. As it took me into its blissful embrace, I vaguely felt my arm slip away from the weeping man they had been latched onto. It felt like a dream when I felt the arm I had been using as a pillow shift, and hands grab me under the arms, lifting me gently back to my actual pillow. I woke up, having forgotten the strange man. It was only when I sat at the breakfast table that my mother exclaimed at the bloodstains on the underside of my short sleeves that I remembered. I saw her worried face, and babbled about the sad man with bloody hands from the previous night. Her worry turned to slight annoyance as my father laughed indulgently, asking me questions about my late-night visitor. I had a history of imaginary friends, and my mother had hoped I had outgrown them. But she was puzzled about the bloodstains, while my father dismissed it as markers or paint. She and I both quickly forgot though, as the time for my birthday party rolled around. The birthday went by and I soon was waiting for the next one. The crying man came and sat on my bed every Tuesday night, and eventually I stopped telling my parents about him. They were getting very irritated and kind of concerned. But they didn't need to be. I knew the crying man meant no harm to me. As the months passed, I struck up a sort of comfortable companionship with him. I would talk to him about my week. I would tell him about my friends. But I never told my friends about him. They'd call me crazy. I'd tell him about my new games and what I'd seen riding my bike around town. Occasionally I'd tell him something cool I learned at school. He usually listened with interest, looking at me with exhausted eyes the color of firewood. He nodded sometimes, but he'd never say a word. And sometimes he'd ruffle my hair or pat my back, and the blood on his hands would come onto me, which I was sure to remove before my mother found out. I grew used to him being there, sitting at the end of my bed into the early hours of Wednesday. And he would always be sad. I mean, sure, every now and then the tears would stop, but his eyes would still be tortured and wet, and his breathing would be kind of hitched and weird. And then his eyes would overflow again, and we'd be back where we started, a crying man and a child trying to console him in whatever way. I tried telling him jokes and funny stories. I leaned against him or patted his arm. I hugged him as much as a pair of small arms could, and told him it would be alright. I always got the feeling he never believed me. And then one day, he smiled at me. A weak, trembling smile, but a smile. I had been telling him about my baby sister who had dumped a bowl of cereal on her head that morning, and he was seemingly unbothered by it, as my parents groaned and laughed. I remember I was laughing as I told him, because to my child's brain that was the funniest thing ever. I could barely get the words out, I was laughing so hard. But eventually I did, and he smiled at me. The slight upturn of his lips shocked me so bad I stopped laughing. He didn't notice, because he wasn't looking at me anymore. He was looking somewhere over my head, and I sat looking up at him, entranced. And then he chuckled to himself, a small, light sound. It made me smile. He looked like he was remembering something, and I was quiet, not wanting to pull him from his reverie. I watched as he closed his eyes and chuckled again softly, tears pushing their way out beneath his shut eyelids. He was sad again, even though he was smiling, and I reached out and took his hand in both of mine. He opened his eyes startled, and as they came to rest on me, I felt something in them I had not felt before. There were still the broken eyes of a broken man, but between the cracks there was now a fierce warmth. It made me feel safe, somehow untouchable. It was right around my 12th birthday when he began to change. He didn't cry as hard anymore, or stare at the red on his hands, usually wide open in his lap. Sure, tears still fell down his cheeks, but his eyes were hard, staring at my window. He would clench and unclench his bloody fists, biting on his lower lip. I dismissed it, though I found it strange. A strange man was bound to do strange things. I still talked to him about all the normal things, but he didn't really seem to pay that much attention. He would just nod, absent-mindedly, when I tapped his shoulder. I didn't really mind. I was fine with him just being there. He was the only one who had never judged me. I could tell him anything. Then came the night I lost him, my secret friend. The night I realized he was more than that, my guardian, my defender. The night he spoke to me for the first and last time. I had been unusually quiet that night, feeling weird about this crush at school. I didn't really want to talk about it, and it must have seemed very unlike me because, for the first time in weeks, my friend looked away from the window and turned to me. I saw the stone in his gaze melt away until there was only his old soft sadness. It was this gentle look of his that prodded me to ask him what I had been wondering for years. "Why is there blood on your hands?" I whispered. He was silent, and his eyes were getting very watery. I tried again. "Why don't you ever wash it off?" He shook his head at me, and his gaze once again became stone as he turned back to the window. I sighed, pulling my covers closer and turning to face the wall. As I settled into sleep, I heard his voice. It was quiet and deep and sounded kind of achy, like when your throat hurts from yelling a lot. All it said was,
"I don't want to forget."
I looked at him over my shoulder. He was still and stoic, a statue staring at the window, glistening red fingers curling and uncurling. The tears made tracks down his cheeks, and I found myself falling asleep to his breathing, which was steady now. The shatter of glass woke me. There was a black masked man kneeling in the shards. He had a glinting knife in his hand. I scrambled back against the wall. He headed towards me and then stopped to listen to my parents' footsteps running up the stairs. He was quicker than them though, than anyone I'd ever seen, and stronger too. He had my heavy dresser against the door before they could even reach it. I was terrified as he looked at me then, while my parents banged on the door trying to get it open. As he approached me, I realized it wasn't a mask. His face was just a dark void, with 2 burning silver pinpoints of light where his eyes should have been. My fear had left me mute and paralyzed, and now was successfully suffocating me. Then another figure stepped out of the shadows. As my eyes darted to the movement, the intruder's gaze followed. He didn't even have time to react before my crying friend stabbed him in the stomach with some sort of dagger. The faceless guy tried to fight, but really, he never stood a chance. My friend had been waiting a long time to do this, and that night, his sadness had changed to anger that could not be contained. I watched as he stabbed once, twice, as many times as the number of tears he had cried. I didn't even know I was crying until I tasted the saltiness from the tears that had found their way between my lips. I could vaguely hear my mother screaming outside my bedroom, and my father talking frantically on the phone while ramming his shoulder against the wood. My dresser was starting to shake with every push of his, and soon it would fall over. The crying man was done. He stood over the mutilated body, which was now emitting black smoke. He was breathing harshly, and for the first time ever, I was afraid of him. I began to sniffle, and he looked at me. He stared at me in surprise as I began to cry harder. He approached the bed slowly, and I was sobbing uncontrollably by the time he took me in his arms. My fear of him vanished then as I buried my head in his shoulders, the familiar smell of cold nights and flowery detergent comforting me. I knew him. He was my strange friend, my weekly visitor, my broken protector. I clutched him with my fingers, grabbing him tight, and he held me, as the dresser fell with a deafening crash and my father tried to force the door open, unsuccessfully. As my mother screamed my name from outside my shattered window, begging for me to be alright, as my neighbors roused, as the sirens drew closer and closer, he held me, sheltered me, soothed me against the panic happening everywhere outside my room. And I closed my eyes and fell asleep to his blood-stained hands rubbing my back and his usual tears in my hair. The rest was a blur to me, and I remember only bits. I found out the body that my sad man stabbed wasn't there when the cops got into my room, and neither was the sad man. There was just me, curled up in a little ball on top of my blanket, sound asleep. My shirt was blood-stained, and my hair was wet. There was glass on the floor, and the jars of seashells I had kept in my dresser had cracked. My parents were crying as they hugged me, but it wasn't the same. We went to a lot of places with buzzing fluorescent lights, and with uniforms who asked questions I didn't want to answer. But I answered them as best I could, leaving out my sad man, saying I just blacked out before the dark man got to my bed, and remembered nothing until they had gotten to me. I didn't care about it. Any of it. My mind was on Tuesday, wanting to see him, but Tuesday came and went without him. And so did every other Tuesday since then. It's been years since he saved my life, and possibly my soul. It's been years since I last saw him, and God, if I could just see him one more time. But I know I won't. He did his duty to me, and perhaps to countless children before me. He saved us, and redeemed himself in everything but his own eyes. His own tired eyes. I'll never know why, nor will I ever find out the reason for his eternal sadness. For the blood on his hands. For the Tuesday night specifically. Though, I have my guesses. Oh, my gentle guardian, my weeping watchman, my old friend. Thank you. I won't ever forget. Well, tale tellers, I hope you enjoyed this episode. I particularly enjoyed the mystery around the Protector, the questions it raises around what appears dangerous at first, and even the cost of protection. A very well-crafted story. Thank you, Spillingskies, for both the story and the approval to narrate it. It means a lot to me. If you enjoyed this episode, take 2 seconds to click that like button. I know Blackboard 360 and Troy Shaw definitely are doing that, so I really appreciate that. It helps people find this channel, but also shares creative writers' work with people all around the world. And I also pay attention to the people that like and follow this channel. I really do. I also do shoutouts for those that give this channel feedback. So shares, likes, reposts, follows, you name it. I really do appreciate it. It's my way of saying thank you back to those that directly support me. So, a big thank you to those who already do this, and a big thank you to you, the listener that takes time to listen. Also, if you have any stories yourself, or ghost stories, or paranormal stories that you just want to get off your chest, well, we'd love to hear it. Or, if you have any requests around creatures or creepypastas that you've been waiting to have heard narrated, well, let me know. Leave it in the comments, or shoot me an email at StoriesFablesGhostlyTales@gmail.com. Or click on the email in my profile page. Makes it a bit easier for you. And tale tellers, it's that time to turn the lights back on. Talk to the crying watchman. And as always, till next time.